Welcome to Hero's Journey PhysioFitness. Our mission is to empower, inspire, and mentor people to reclaim their health and become self-reliant in their fitness. I'm your host, Dr. Cameron Hogue. Join with me as my co-host, Annabelle Rios.
And we are going live in 3, 2, 1.
You beat me to it today. All right. Well, welcome to the next episode. We're still talking about the Hero's Journey Guide, Step 0, Part 2. That was a mouthful. But last time we talked about mindset, and then today we're going to talk more about knowledge, things that you kind of need to know in order to get started. That's why it's Step 0 is before you start. And it's not going to be it'll be pretty detailed, but we'll kind of go through this more quickly, and we'll have future episodes that might go a little bit more in depth. But any questions before we get started, Annabelle?
I'm ready to take notes, Doc.
All right, let's do it. So one thing we need to talk about is some just basic anatomy and physiology. What's going on underneath the hood here? I think the body is complex to a lot of people. It is very complex, actually, but some people just don't even, know what we're made of. Don't know the bones, don't know the muscles, don't really know what's going on. So we're going to do a quick recap of some anatomy and physiology. Anatomy is basically the structure of the human body. Physiology is basically the function of those structures. And if I'm looking at you, Annabelle, and you're a human, we would classify that as an organism. And I think from an organism, we can work backwards and go to basically the very the smallest part of a human, which is the cell. And I think we all know cells.
Hopefully you paid attention in biology in high school.
That's right. A cell is the basic unit of life. And there's actually things smaller than a cell. They're called organelles that make up a cell. Think of like the nucleus, mitochondria, cytoskeleton. I think there's like 12 or 13.
Man, that is all slowly coming back to me. It's been a while.
You're like, I had a homework assignment about this many years ago.
Yeah, many moons ago.
Yeah, so you have organelles that make up a cell. And from the cell, a cell will then organize itself into different tissue. So you have organelles, cells, and then tissues. So depending on the programming of that cell, the cell will then become a different type of tissue. And unless it's a stem cell, in which it's a different topic. But the reason we're going through this to make a point later on, so we'll wrap back around to this. But tissue in the human body can be 4 different things, okay? I think a lot of us know of muscle tissue.
Yep.
So that's in the personal training and maybe bodybuilding world, that is the one that gets the most attention. It's, take protein for your muscles and, all this type of stuff, and it's muscle definition and size. And so there's muscle tissue, which can either be skeletal muscle, quads, biceps, all the external muscles there, or it could be like cardiac muscle or cardiac tissue, like your heart. Or it could even be smooth muscle, which is like the hollow, visceral internal organs, like your pancreas or like your intestines or something like that. So that's all muscle tissue. So it could be any one of those things.
Gosh, I did not know there was that many in there.
And that's just under muscle tissue, because then you have nervous tissue. Basically your neurons, they're made up of nerve cells, and they carry messages and send signals and all that kind of stuff. So you have muscle tissue, you have nervous tissue. You also have what we call connective tissue, which basically supports and binds together other types of tissue, as kind of the name implies. It can be stuff like bones, blood, even like lymphatic type of tissue. And the 4th type of tissue is what's called epithelial tissue, and that provides more of a covering. Think like skin, maybe the linings of certain internal organs or passages in the body. But cells will make up tissue, and that tissue could be connective, epithelial, muscle, or nervous. Okay?
So epithelial is more kind of like the armor protecting it.
Yeah, but it's the armor. Your skin is the protective barrier between the outside world and your insides. simply put. So tissue, cells to tissue, tissues that make up an organ. So those different type of, whether it's connective tissue or muscle tissue, will then make up an organ. And when those tissues come together to make an organ, they have a specific job. So an organ, like the heart has a specific job, the lungs have a specific job, your muscles have a specific job, and that's an organ. And then when you put a group or a system of organs together, that's an organ system, which basically helps and gives you like advantage for survival. And that organ systems make up the organism as a whole, which in this case we're talking about humans.
Next week will be animals.
We're going to be veterinarians here. So why did we go through that? We'll kind of wrap back around to that. I want to make a good point from this here in a minute. But the big takeaway on anatomy and physiology is the body works together as a system. And if we want to optimize our health, we need to consider all the organ systems and how they interact with each other. You can't just go and lift heavy weights without thinking about your cardiovascular and like respiratory systems. You can't just isolate and want to work just the muscle tissue without thinking about your nervous tissue, without thinking about all the different types of tissues and organs we just discussed.
Essentially, you don't want to be the guy in the gym who's allergic to cardio.
Oh man, don't be allergic to cardio.
Yeah.
But no, that's a good point. So big takeaway, we work together as a system. Any questions over basic biology, kind of anatomy and physiology?
Man, I took anatomy and physiology in high school. I think I did good enough. Hopefully, if she's listening, I think I did good enough, right, teacher? But no, it makes sense.
Yeah. So then we need to think about nutrition, okay? And I want you to think about this. Think about this. You are what you eat. Just think about that. Because a lot of people don't understand even how that system works. You know?
So I'm going to be a donut.
So let's take donut for an example. So that donut, once you put it in your mouth and start chewing, will pass through it's called your GI system, your gastrointestinal system. Think about mouth to anus. I combined mouth to anus. Think about your mouth to your anus, and basically all the tubing that goes through is your GI tract. So the donut enters your GI tract through your mouth. It'll mix with different types of digestive juices, causing, larger molecules to break down into smaller. And then depending on the type of food, we'll talk about it here in a minute, like macros, the body will absorb it during a different time of that GI tract. And once it gets absorbed, it goes through the walls of the small intestines into your bloodstream, and then your bloodstream delivers it to the rest of your body. So,
in short, for those who speak the language I do, you eat something, your body decides what to do with it, and then distributes it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, you are what you eat. So, what are the three macronutrients?
Protein, fat, carbs.
Yeah, protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And here's the big question that I want to ask you and our viewers. Which one of those macronutrients are the most important? So if you're out there listening, think fat, think carbohydrates, think protein. Which one of those is the most important? Obviously, we need potentially all of them, but there is one that stands above the others. What's the answer, Annabelle?
I would say protein for the gains.
For the gains. So you're correct. Protein is, and I want to explain why. Proteins are the building block of your body. Pretty much almost all lean, so like non-fatty tissue is composed of protein. So think about all the tissue we just talked about just a minute ago, not just, as you're saying, Annabelle, the gains, like your muscles, but all the other tissue, all the lean tissue are composed of protein. So therefore it has to be the most important because it composes all the other tissue.
So all four of them that you just mentioned
are composed of protein.
Interesting.
So I think a lot of gym bros might say, oh, get your protein in because, you need to fuel your muscles. And like, that's true. But even deeper than that, it composes all of your tissue. Every one that we just talked about a minute ago is composed of protein. And obviously a protein is a molecule made up of amino acids, and it helps you with, as we just said, tissue structure. It can work in our hormone system, our metabolic system. It can help our transportation system, balancing acids and bases, even like enzymes, and help regulate our metabolism. They are the most important. I want to make that point clear. For multiple reasons, they're the most important.
I think, I don't know, maybe today, since we have some more things to cover, but maybe at some point is discussing how much protein do I need, and
we'll have to. We don't want to go too deep in this one. We just want to get people aware.
Is there such a thing of too much protein? I think we should definitely cover that.
Yeah, we'll do that in a later episode. Okay, so this might draw some responses here, but I'm going to say the next one, carbohydrates, are the least important. There are some diets where people are getting minimal to no carbohydrates and are not just surviving, but they're actually thriving because your body
need carbs, Cam.
So we're not vilifying carbohydrates. We're just, if we're looking at them as the most, which ones are the most important and which ones are the least important, you can kind of put carbs at the bottom. You technically don't need them. I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't eat them. I eat them. I think that you should, but technically you don't need them.
Yeah, I guess you're referring to as like surviving, like as a bare minimum, what do you actually need to survive?
Yeah, I mean, there's diets, think of the ketogenic diet, that you're only getting a very small amount of carbohydrates. The rest is protein and fats. And people are doing pretty well on those diets, I would say. But not for this debate during this podcast, but a carbohydrate is essentially carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. We call them sugars. And for the purposes of this, we're just going to break carbohydrates down into two type of classifications. They can be a simple carb or they can be a complex carb. So most simple carbs are not what we would classify, in our opinion, optimal. But there are some, there are some fruits, there's milk that we would classify as simple carbs, and they can contain some, very valuable vitamins and nutrients. But a lot of other simple carbs have just honestly just been processed, refined, and stripped of their natural fiber and nutrients. Think of like candy, carbonated beverages, table sugar, added sugar, syrups. Like,
when I think of simple carbs, I think of it's too easy for your body to process.
That's exactly right. That's why it's simple. Your body can simply digest it and absorb it, and then it's gone.
You can immediately get that sugar rush. Boom.
Boom, you feel good, and then 15 minutes later, you're hungry again and get the low. So that's a simple carb. I would say, and it's just a general rule, avoid them. I mean, there's some fruits that are simple carbs, and I think fruits are good. Milk is a simple carb.
I think we can leave the fruits out just to not confuse people for now, but essentially, candy, process.
Yep, processed sugars, avoid. Then there's what we'd call complex carbs. Those are going to be carbohydrates found in whole, unprocessed foods. Like we said, it could be some fruits, it can be complex.
Maybe quickly just explain whole foods.
Yeah, a whole food would be something that you can find out in nature. You can go to a garden and you can, gather whatever type of vegetable, fruits that you want, legumes.
Not in a box.
Not in a box. Yeah.
It doesn't have multiple labels. If you look at it and it has multiple labels, it contains X, Y, and Z. It may not be. Right.
It probably won't be. Complex carb would be mainly fruits, vegetables, legumes. Could even be whole grains, like brown rice or wheat, like kind of that kind of bread. And it's more complex because it takes longer to digest. Because it's harder to digest, it gives you a more stable source of energy. Like it'll fuel you for longer. It also doesn't spike your insulin levels up as much, which people think that's actually a benefit, that you're not constantly spiking your insulin and your blood sugar levels. So a general rule with carbs, we're just going to say choose complex carbs over simple. Basically choose whole foods over processed foods when it comes to carbohydrates.
Yeah. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. I'd say that's a good rule to follow there. And then the last one is fats. And a fat is basically a lipid or a fatty acid chain. They allow you to store energy. It cushions organs. It can make hormones. It allows you to absorb fat-soluble vitamins, which would be like vitamin A, vitamin K, D, and E, which are fat-soluble. And it definitely helps with cell membrane integrity. So again, go back to that cell that we just talked about. Fats are vital for cell membrane integrity and hormones and to be able to absorb vitamins. So they're important too. So I would say proteins and fats are probably more of the important macronutrients, carbs less. But I personally tell people that you should incorporate all of them in a healthy way, that you're avoiding some of like the simple carbs and some of the really fatty lean meat and stuff, or fatty meat.
No, it's always interesting, especially with fat. I think everybody's always saying avoid fat at all costs, but there's good fat and there's
so don't avoid fats. Now there's debate between unsaturated and saturated. There's also trans fat, and we're just going to go ahead and tell people to avoid that. That's more industrial processed, and it adds like a hydrogen. I'm not too sure about the whole process there, but most of the medical community says to avoid trans fats, and I think that's a pretty standard.
It's not as natural.
Yeah, it's not natural. So there's debate about unsaturated fats and saturated fats. I'm not getting into that. I think they're both fine. But unsaturated fat, just think about if it's a liquid at room temperature, olive oil, avocado oil. And then saturated fat would be solid at room temperature. So think butter, ghee, tallow, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe more animal fats is what we'd say is saturated.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are your, what we'd call macronutrients. But there's also micronutrients. So think like vitamins and minerals, and those usually get underlooked. Like people are like, oh, just hit your macros. I haven't heard anyone say hit your micros.
Dude, are you hitting your micros?
Oh man, we got to bring that back.
I'm spot on this week.
Maybe you hit your macros, bro. But they're very important for things like energy production, think like immune function, and then like minerals definitely play a role in like bone health and balancing fluids and stuff like that. So think that these actually play a potentially more of a role in your health and function. And most, like we're saying, simple or processed foods are stripped of these. So if you're eating more whole foods, they're going to contain these.
Yeah. I think a lot of times too with all these processed things is they strip the food of everything, and we think that, okay, well, it says that it's high in this one item or it contains more of this, but we don't always fully understand how the food or the thing is supposed to work together, and we think we do, and we could be missing or stripping it of some of the micronutrients that are very significant.
That's very true. So we talked about basic anatomy and physiology. We talked about basic nutrition, macros and micros. And now we need to talk a little bit, at least about, exercise science, or the science of exercise. And I just wanted you to think about that as, how does the body change with exercise? That's essentially what that is saying, is how does the body react with this exercise versus that, or these combined? Yeah, that's what I'd say exercise science means.
If you move, your body will grow.
if you build it, they will come. So, Annabelle, what is exercise?
Moving.
Yeah, moving. And there's a pretty good definition that I found out there. I think it goes pretty much something like this, that exercise is an activity that involves effort, some sort of physical effort. and usually it has a purpose, right? It has a purpose to change health or maybe even like sustain health, but exercise usually has a purpose and it requires effort, and people hate the E word, effort.
The elephant in the room.
The effort in the room. So thinking about exercise, I personally think that exercise can fall into 4 categories. Okay. So a few episodes ago, we talked about fitness and that there was 10 aspects of fitness. And we believe that those 10 aspects of fitness will fall into 4 main categories. So like the first would be what we just call cardio. So if you're looking at a type of exercise, some people choose cardio.
Achoo, sorry, my allergies are coming up with cardio.
You got your cardio allergies on. And so if you think about from the other day when we talked about potentially like speed or cardiovascular endurance or stamina, like a lot of those type of those aspects of fitness would fall into cardio. So that's one kind of bucket that you can think of in terms of how you would exercise. I think rower, bike, swim, run, elliptical, things like that would consist of cardio. And then the next bucket would be what we'd call resistance training, which you're using some sort of resistance, whether that's your body weight, like calisthenics, whether that's using bands, free weights like dumbbells, kettlebells, barbells, or even like machines. Like you're using some sort of resistance to train your body, usually with the purpose of gaining like strength and hypertrophy. And that targets more of like what we call the skeletal muscles from the skeletal tissue from earlier. Mm-hmm. While cardio will probably work more of your cardiac tissue, and honestly connective tissue with like how you. Anyway, there's a lot that goes into that. But then there's also the bucket of mobility and flexibility. So that would think like Pilates, yoga, more types of training or exercise that involves moving and holding positions and trying to like gain range and kind of master that range. And I would say flexibility and mobility is especially true if you don't really train it for the spine. Like you might do, let's say an overhead press. So you're pressing over your head. That's definitely helping with your shoulder mobility, but there's no spinal movement there. Or like when you squat, it's definitely working your ankles and knees and hips, like that mobility, but your spine is still being neutral. So like yoga really looks at a rotation, side bending, flexion, holding these different positions, and it's better maybe for spinal mobility.
Do not underestimate it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yoga can kick your butt if you've never done it before.
Yeah, you say you're squatting heavy, benching heavy, you're like, hey, how do yoga? You're like, oh my God, it's destroying me.
And then the fourth bucket would be like a sport. So a sport is definitely a type of exercise. So spike ball, soccer, basketball. So if you think of those 4 buckets, I would say that is like different types of exercise. You got the cardio bucket, you got your resistance training bucket, you got your flexibility, mobility bucket, and you got your sport bucket. And all the 10 aspects of fitness will fall into one of those buckets or a combination of those buckets. So that's what we'd say is like the different types of exercise. But we have a really important point to make with exercise here. Annabelle, what's the difference between exercise and training?
I feel like training, you actually have like a purpose or a plan. Training is more of you having a purpose or a plan. Like I just think about, when you're in a sport, you're practicing, you're training for a specific goal or objective. Mm-hmm. When I say exercise is, I don't know, you're just going out there.
Yeah, like we said, movement that requires effort.
Yeah, you're just going out there to move.
Yeah. And we're not saying there's anything wrong with exercise, but we do want people to not view it as exercise, but view it as training. Because training, we have kind of defined, means you have a specific purpose, like you said. And if you're not, number 1, measuring, number 2, tracking, and number 3, progressing, then you're just exercising. And I think if you're just exercising, this can lead to burnout and not hitting your goals because you don't have a plan and you're not even knowing if you're getting there.
Well, it also goes back to the other episode about having that 3-year commitment. Well, what are you committing to? If
Yeah.
you haven't even, you have to have that in mind of what I'm working towards, and apply everything else that we've said.
Right. So like a real life example here of exercise versus training. You have two people. One person just likes to go on runs, just goes out a couple times a week and runs. And then the other person goes out a couple times a week and runs, but they have a watch, and that watch tracks their miles and it tracks their time. And week by week, maybe month by month, they're trying to just 10 seconds off that time, or, be able to run just a little bit longer. And by just measuring and tracking, it's going to help you progress, which is going to positively benefit your health. Not to say that the other one's wrong. Like it's way better to go out it's way better to start and just get going. But a lot of the times that might not lead to body composition changes, which is what a lot of people want. It might not help with lowering your blood pressure as much as you would want if you're not doing as much as you need. And if you're not tracking, measuring, and progressing, then you might not get to that point. Better than nothing.
Yeah, it's all. So my thought is this: it's better to start running than not, right?
Correct.
But you need to know where you're running to eventually. Right. Because like you said, you're going to get tired. You're like, man, I've been running. I don't know where I'm going.
Right.
Where is this going to end up? But better to start, have a plan. So have your 3-year commitment, like we're talking about. Have your goal of what you're going to be working towards, and then break it down.
That's exactly right. Next episode, we actually are going to talk about what we'd call step 1, which is take action. So we'll actually be getting into more of the nitty gritty there. And then the last thing we want to talk about in step 0, this is kind of aside from all the others, is go get a checkup. And this might not apply to everybody, but I would say for a lot of people, you need to go get your blood work. You need to see what's going on under the hood. If you have an injury or pain, I'm biased, but go see a physical therapist. Email us. I'll be glad to have a consultation and talk to you about some of these things, or even just your health in general. But a lot of people need to get a checkup. They need to see what's going on. If you are pre-diabetic or diabetic, that might influence your nutrition choices. Like you might need to cut back on some of the carbohydrates versus someone who's not diabetic. So it's good to know where you're starting. So we always recommend going and getting a checkup or seeing a physical therapist if you have any type of injury or pain.
No, because kind of like even everything we've talked about, you need to know where you're at right now to know where you're going to go. Yeah, I think everybody needs to get a checkup, get your blood work, and then go from there.
I totally agree. So this ends step 0 when we talked about mindset and knowledge and checkup. And next episode, we'll get into actual step 0 or step 1 of taking action.
Yeah. So again, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Hero's Journey PhysioFitness. Send us any of your questions, topics you want to discover. Well, maybe you might be discovering, or you want to discuss. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's it. Just
remember, you're a human. We should not seek perfection, but daily improvement. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.